But thank you. And then today we Sergio will be the first, and then there'll be you ask question along the way because it'll be just a few minutes before. Can leave at the end also, but we emphasized the one characteristic. All the speakers have been my co-authors, but they are not necessarily speaking about a joint work. You know, some of them are, but okay, I leave for Sergio too.
Thank you, Aloisio. It's a pleasure to open the panel in honor of Aloisio, of his 80 years. Some time ago, I participated in a panel to talk about his contribution. And then I revised what I wrote to add. And, you know, it turned out that it's more than half of what I wrote is after. So it's just amazing, his productivity. That is something which is remarkable. And I'll try to summarize some of the more important academic contributions to science. It's in my point of view. It's a very personal point of view. And then later on, I will talk about how he got involved more and more along of his career. And you're going to see by the dates of the publications with practical applications, first to the Brazilian economy, and then later on to topics which are of interest of every other place. But I think it's very interesting how was the evolution of his thought. And so Aloisio's importance is manifold. It's noteworthy that he received this year the Econometric Society 2026 Sonnenschein Service Prize for outstanding service to economic profession and society itself. His importance is not only academic, but he has been very influential in policy in Brazil. And some of his ideas are also applied, you know, they have been discussed even informally, but they have been discussed even in relation to other economies. I mean, Mohamed El Erian has talked about changing the target, the inflation target in the US to 3%, which, as we're going to see, is one of the topics that interested Aloisio. It's only fair if I would start with the academic work. It's only fair to start with his statistics contribution, his PhD thesis. We can see part of, you know, one of the main publications in '78 on the central limit theorem in Banach spaces in the Journal of Motivated Analysis. Then sooner later, in '80, came his book with Évariste Genet, the central limit theorem for real and Banach-valued random variables. In economics, his first well-cited work is with Heckman, Smoothness, Comparative Dynamics, and Turnpike Theorem in Econometrica 77. I'm particularly fond of a 1985 paper that he wrote, which is the lack of Pareto optimality with the infinitely many commodities, the need for impatience. It's a very neat paper that shows that you know, in order to have Pareto optimality existence, you need to have continuity in the Mackey topology. Now, this in itself wouldn't mean much. However, there is a very nice interpretation that this is linked to impatience. And so I think it's a very neat paper, and anyone who has dealt with you know, sequences where the measure is lim-inf knows that this sort of problem can arise, the non-existence Well, another interesting result, again in the theoretical part, can be seen the once but not twice differentiability of the policy function in econometrics. Also a very interesting result. However, and we're getting here to 1991. Towards the end of the 90s, Aloisio gets more and more interested in practical problems. The first that I remember, I'm sure there are others, but the first time I remember that he had done something very interesting. He assembles a team that would help the design of auctions for the privatization of the electricity sector in Brazil. The second thing, together with Marcia Leon and later Tomás Brizola, he estimates models of speculative attacks on the currency. By then, prior to 99, in between 94 and 99, we had a quasi-pegged, not exactly pegged, but quasi-pegged exchange rate regime, which was obviously, going to blow some time. And Aloisio modeled this, by 97 or so, and predicting that it would come, and it came actually in the beginning of 99. The currency couldn't hold. One example of this work is with Marcia Leon, speculative attacks on debt and dollarization in Revista Brasileira de Economia in 2002. Third, in 1999, so three things by the end of the 90s, okay? In 1999, he gets hired to consult for the Central Bank of Brazil. Myself and Arminio Fraga were at the Central Bank Board. Arminio was the governor of the Central Bank. I was a deputy governor responsible for economic policy. And I was responsible in Brazil for the introduction of implementation of the inflation targeting in Brazil. So all the framework, I designed the framework, implemented, etc. So we had the idea of having someone, an outsider, to come and talk to us. An outsider we knew would tell us the truth, not just say what we wanted to listen. So Aloisio came to work with us. And every week we talked to him, and sometimes we gave him assignments. One of the assignments he was given was, two of the assignments in particular were very interesting. The bankruptcy law, he was asked to help the central bank produce a text for the bankruptcy law, which was one of the things the central bank was working on by that time. And later on, he was asked also to help with inflation targeting in a very specific question. In the first meeting that determined what would be the level of inflation that would be the target in Brazil, there was a disagreement between the planning. Here in Brazil, the target is determined by the planning minister and the finance minister, together with the governor of the central bank. Each one has a vote. And by then, we proposed a very low inflation target. I think was something I couldn't get the records because I think we didn't register everything. We registered only the final version. But I think it was 3.25% we proposed. And the planning minister and the finance minister, Pedro Parente and Pedro Malan, they said, no, this is too low. And it was set at 4. And so Emilio and I were very puzzled by that, but of course, those are the rules, and so four was the number which was chosen, and I have to tell, there was a lot of wisdom in this four, a lot of wisdom. So what we charged Aloisio was, could you please help us determine what's the optimal level of the inflation target?
By the way, I spoke with Malan, that I was good friend, that he should not put that low target in Brazil.
Anyhow, he listened to you, which was good. No problem. It was for a good cause. So, so these two topics are going to be topics where Aloisio will influence a lot the Brazilian economy and the Brazilian law, and produce also very good first-rate academic work, which is a trait that I think is very remarkable in Aloisio. Talking about, we're going to talk about the inflation target in a moment, but the bankruptcy law was approved in Brazil in 2005. And his role was fundamental in that, as well as his role in the improvement of the law, which was to take place in 2020. This triggered one of the longest stream of academic works on collateral, whose main co-author is Mário Páscoa. For example, Araujo, Páscoa, and Martinez, Collateral Avoids Ponzi Schemes in Incomplete Markets in Econometrica 2002. Two examples of the bankruptcy law in Brazil. Araujo, Ferreira, and Funchal, the Brazilian Bankruptcy Law Experience in the Journal of Corporate Finance, 2012. And Araujo, Moraes, Ferreira, Ponticelli, and Soutora, the labor effects of a judicial bias in bankruptcy in the Journal of Financial Economics, 2023. So you can see, my point in emphasizing the dates, you can see that, you know, curiosities which arose because of his important contribution to policy also gave, in the end, became a very long stream of academic contributions which are of quite important. Let me say that that's the same time at the end of the 90s, just before going to the other stuff. At the same time, in the end of the 90s, he also starts a long collaboration with Humberto Moreira on non-single crossing principal agent models. The first paper on this stream is Araujo and Moreira, General Lagrangian Approach for Non-Concave Moral Hazard Problems in the Journal Mathecon, 2001. But they have been publishing until recently on the subject, about 6 papers together. Still on the applied works, I think a very interesting contribution is given to a result of a consulting about the pre-salt auctions. In Brazil, the oil auctions of exploration of the pre-salt had a very peculiar design made by the PT, the workers, the Labour's Party, by then. It was that the auction was necessary to have a 20% mandatory participation of Petrobras. However, Petrobras was also a bidder. So it was a very peculiar auction where Petrobras was a receiver, but also a bidder, you know, so it's a very strange auction. So they were asked to you know, see how the auction was and you know, look at it, and he assembled a team out of which Paulo Klinger Monteiro, who also is a very long time co-author of his, was in the team. And Paulo Klinger, you know, in the middle of the discussion, found out that this auction has no pure Nash equilibrium, only mixed strategies, which makes them extremely hard to be practical, obviously. And this has been published.
Some friends thanked me, so they always want to give an example for an auction without mixed strategy, and then what's done in Brazil,
Yes.
not by chance.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I mean, so it's published in 2016, but this was much before. He never stopped working in inflation targeting models. So when I left Banco Itaú, I was in the central bank. Then 1.5 years after I left, I went to Banco Itaú, where I was the equivalent of the joint CRO plus CFO of the bank. When I left the bank in 2013, I came back to Getúlio Vargas Foundation, where I am still up to now. And as soon as I arrived in Fundação, about 6 months or a year after, he came to me and said, Sergio, I have the answer to your question. Which question, Luis? On the level of the inflation target. I said, wonderful, and this was 2014 approximately. And in fact, the first answer came published in the International Economic Review in 2016, Inflation Targeting with Imperfect Information, in Araujo, Berriel, and Santos. Okay. Later on, he refined his work and published, it was now accepted for publication at the American Economic Journal Macroeconomics, Inflation Targeting under Fiscal Fragilities. You know, very, very interesting results, essentially showing that if you choose a target which is too low, it's going to be very highly costly, especially if you are very near a fiscal dominance. The fiscal dominance regime is when, you know, it's the debt over GDP is so high that essentially you reach the limit of Sergeant Wallace arithmetic, you know, perverse arithmetic. And it's going to be necessary to do, you know, to inflate away the debt necessarily. We are very close to that, by the way, in Brazil, using Aloisio's and his co-authors' models. And we did some research that the number now is between 85 and 90% of GDP, and we are very close. We are 81.1%. So when you choose too low a target, you know, people know that you're not going to get there. So you never have the expectations aligned to it. And this increases a lot the cost of maintaining inflation in the target. And so essentially, if you raise the target, it's much easier. You don't need to have such a high real interest rate to maintain the inflation in the target. And you know, if you look at the models themselves, the optimal target is something around 4.5% right now. Okay, right now maybe a little bit higher, but to have much higher, it's not really a good thing because of you know, things which are out of the model. But anyhow, it shows that the level of 4% was actually quite a visionary level, and this was in 1999, much prior to this. It is worth mentioning still two of his main preoccupations, where he has been also very influential in policy in Brazil. First, after the amazing results obtained by James Heckman on returns of education in early childhood, Aloisio was very important for the approval of the Fundeb, which gives incentives for municipalities to invest in early education, among other things. And Brazil has been increasing the share of students under 5 years old has been increasing at an amazing pace. The share of students, the share of children who are in school, we're 4 or 5 years, I think we are more than 90% or something like that. We're very, very high. And the years behind, the year 1 to 3 is still a problem. 3 to 4, 3 is 1 to 3 is still a problem. It's about, I think it's about 60%, if I'm not mistaken, something like that, which is still low, but it's much, much higher than it was in Brazil before. And it was direct influence, personal influence of Aloisio. One of the academic works that can be seen in this area is Araujo, Portela, and Ogawa, The Effects of Universal Early Childhood Education in Brazil in Journal of Human Capital 2025. The second point, he also did a fantastic job in estimating the new tax reform, the value-added, the unification of the value-added tax in Brazil. Brazil, together with France, were the two countries that first introduced value-added taxes in the world. However, exactly in the same year. However, Brazil took a very strange road. We decided to introduce value-added taxes which were at the state level. So there was a huge diversification of legislations on the topic, and which obviously became, with time, became completely inconsistent and extremely inefficient. So it was necessary to centralize again. It was a discussion that took more than 20 years in the Congress. Now, Aloisio had a point which he has been studying since 2013 or so, which was that different sectors in Brazil have different elasticities to tax evasion, to indirect tax evasion. And so he wanted to incorporate this different behavior of tax evasion on the tax schedule itself. And it is very interesting, the constitutional amendment, the tax reform was approved, and there were 3 tiers of taxes, of indirect taxes, and the tiers basically conform perfectly to the levels, to the optimal levels that Aloisio and his co-authors computed. Of course, this is a very local thing, so it was published in Portuguese, but it is a indirect...
It's been submitted to international journals also.
Okay, good. Good, that's very good. But it has been published in Brazil in Cadernos de Finanças Públicas, public finance notebooks. In summary, I find Aloisio's career extremely inspiring. He started working both in statistics and economics in very abstract banner spaces, which is fine. It's an intellectually important problem, but apart from that, also had some applications. But he was not happy just with these theoretical applications. He saw the need to help the Brazilian economy first, also. And gradually turned his attention to real problems of our society, especially here. This also inspired him to write very interesting first-class academic works, as I have mentioned in the, now. But mainly, they were practical applications that help improve the welfare of the Brazilians. Obviously, as his work in inflation targeting shows, this is immediately applicable to other countries where it makes sense. In his production of students, he was a teacher and of many generations of Brazilians, and I can think of many. I can think of finance ministers and many people in the central bank board, governors who have been his students, But apart from that, he advised 91 master's degrees and 52 PhDs, contributing substantially to the improvement of the economic academic community and economic policy in Brazil and outside. The first class that Aloisio had in IMPA in 1980 consisted of 3 students, myself, Carlos Ivan Simonsen Leal, who is now president of Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and one of the most important centers of social sciences in Brazil, and in Latin America, the first, by University of Tilburg, the first department of economics since they started doing this rank. And Ricardo Paes de Barros, who is a well-known academic, but very interested in social policy. Carlos Ivan and myself were his first 2 master's students. I'm very happy to have been chosen for this opening. Thank you, Aloisio.
Thank you very much, Sergio.